moving on to contraception and fertility. So, we need to talk about what you need to do if you do not want to get pregnant or have a child. And then there are certain people that eventually do want to get pregnant and have a child, and they have some difficulties doing that. So, we can talk about the flip side of that coin. Now, for most of you, I hope we're following on, need to know the contraceptive side of things. I know this can be I don't know why it can be like a taboo to talk about with young people, but we need to just face the facts that statistically, some of you are sexually active, some of you aren't, and that's awesome. You would fall into the abstinence category. But some of you are sexually active, and we just need to be realistic and need to keep you safe, protected, and understanding what having a child does with your future, because they're a full-time commitment for many, many years. So let's just jump right into it. Types of birth control. This is a great graphic just to show you kind of the different forms. And there's 4 forms of birth control in humans: chemical, barrier, natural, and surgical. Let's start over here in this top quadrant with chemical. For chemical forms of contraceptives, birth control, we can have contraceptive implants or the IUD or IUs, so an intrauterine device. Now, the contraceptive implant would be implanted into your arm, and it releases certain hormones to control your menstrual cycle, to remove the ability for you to ovulate. So IUDs and contraceptive implants work in this fashion, as well as the contraceptive pill. So they're going to release hormones into your blood system that keep you typically from ovulating, or if they're not keeping you from ovulating, they keep your uterine lining from being prepared and ready for implantation. Now, with chemical forms being hormonal, this is where we have lots of not necessarily myths, but there's lots of misconceptions of, does this cause me to gain weight? Is this something that contributes to me having migraines? Or most girls are most concerned about gaining weight. All forms of birth control are different hormonally, and you have to find the one that works best for you. And if you can think back to our unit on hormones, hormones are released very, very slowly and work over long periods of time. So it takes time to figure out which one is the correct one for your body. And you have to work very closely with a doctor. So this is why it can be complicated, and sometimes there's some maybe negative information out there on those, but many, many women use chemical forms of contraception, and they're very effective. Then we want to talk about barrier forms, because I need you to also understand a chemical contraceptive does not protect you from sexually transmitted diseases and infections, which we'll cover in the next video. Yes, it can protect you from unwanted and unplanned pregnancy, but it cannot protect you from an infection that you might not know the partner that you are with has. And we need to make sure we understand any form of sexual activity can pass on a sexually transmitted disease or infection. So it's not just penetration from penis to vagina, it's also oral sex and anal sex. And we just use the flat out terms because we're not trying to talk in code. We don't need to talk in code because y'all are old enough to understand the importance. If you're going to do the act of some of these things, you need to understand what the possible repercussions are. And that's just always been my policy. So barrier protections are very, very, very important if you are having sex at any time with someone who is not somebody that you've made a covenant of marriage with, and may not be always having sex with them. Like it might be a partner that, is just one of that may become one of many. I need you to understand you need to protect yourself from potential sexually transmitted diseases and infections. And we can only do this through barrier methods. This would be the condom, which is placed on a male's erect penis, the femidom, which can be placed into the vaginal canal, or those are going to be the 2 best barrier options. And of course, there is the diaphragm, which is not necessarily going to protect you from sexually transmitted diseases or infections. But the diaphragm is a cone-shaped device that sits below the cervix, so it doesn't allow sperm to enter into the cervical area. So my soapbox on condoms and femidoms, please please, please use protection if you are participating in any kind of sexual intercourse. Okay, moving on to this next side, natural and surgical methods of birth control. Of course, for natural, many of these work in conjunction in what we call the natural or family planning method. So, for individuals who maybe don't want to be on a chemical form of birth control, maybe they're with someone that they're married to, and it's a partner that they'll have for a lifelong amount of time, they can use the natural family planning method, which involves abstinence around ovulation. So, refraining from having sex around ovulation, monitoring body temperature, and monitoring changes in cervical mucus to try to best detect when is the female getting ready for ovulation, and how can we not participate in sex during that time to avoid ultimately implantation later if sperm and egg do meet. So, with the natural family planning method, this is something that's definitely more for people who, if they were to get pregnant, it would be okay because it's not quite as effective as anything else. So this one is the one that has the highest rate of pregnancies develop. So just note this one is definitely not foolproof, okay? And then, of course, surgical. This would be for males and females who are absolutely done with the idea or possibility of having a child. So a vasectomy for a man where the sperm duct is cut to not allow sperm ultimately into his semen. And then female sterilization, which can be in a couple different forms, but the most common is having the oviducts either cut and tied, or you also can have like a hysterectomy where you remove the uterus or remove the ovaries, partial, full. It kind of depends on what's going on with the female. So those are your different forms of birth control. Let's go ahead and look on to fertility, okay? Fertility treatment. So this would be for people who are struggling to conceive, and you just never know. This may one day be you, as it does happen. Artificial insemination is one. So if the male's not producing healthy sperm, the female can have healthy sperm from a sperm donor placed into her during the point of ovulation in her menstrual cycle. Social issues to consider: the male must be able to cope with the fact that the child technically is not biologically his. And then sperm donors may father multiple children who really aren't able to know who their parents are. There's also the use of fertility drugs, which is really honestly fairly common in this day and age. If the female is not producing enough eggs, hormones like FSH can be given to stimulate egg production. But other issues to consider when we start implementing fertility drugs: several eggs can be released, which can increase the chance of multiples at birth. So that is something just to keep in mind. In vitro fertilization is also another topic covered. This is where we can have fertility drugs given to the female to stimulate that egg production. Eggs can be harvested from the ovary. They're then taken and removed from the female's body, placed into a petri dish where the sperm from the father, egg from the mother in the petri dish will be combined to form that embryo. The embryo is then placed back into the uterus, and several embryos can be placed at one time to increase the chance of developing further. But issues to just think about when we're talking about in vitro fertilization: it is very, very expensive, and a lot of couples can't afford it. If you have several embryos implanted, it can result in the aspect of multiple births. And then some women have to use IVF to get pregnant because they waited to a later age to get pregnant, so they're unable to conceive naturally. So just some things and topics to consider when we're looking at these. Okay, that's it for this unit, or excuse me, not the unit. That's it for this section. Go ahead and move on to your notes, any of those that you need to take down, your CFU, Ed puzzles, and your activity for the day. Good job, guys.